When I was 13 years old, my family was robbed by my mom's ex-best friend. Before robbing us, they had broke in multiple times. One time, they left the front door open, and another, my mom opened the laundry room door, and as she did, the back door closed. Having these experiences, we changed the locks and made sure we locked the doors at night and armed the home alarm. The following year, the events in the story happened. For context, my family lived in a very bad area. People had been robbed, and some people had been assaulted or jumped, my brother included. My father is a truck driver, so my mother, brother, and I were usually home alone. My mom is someone who really enjoys watching the ID channel on TV. In fact, my town was once featured on one of the ID channel shows. Our town has such a high crime rate that a human trafficking ring was busted, and my mom's ex-best friend knew someone that was actually busted. The city I live in is the most dangerous in our country, and just yesterday we drove past a car dump. Earlier in this year, we had to call the cops twice. Once because we heard someone in the backyard, and another time because we heard gunshots. One night, my brother was asleep in the living room, and I was in my room. My mother was in her bedroom. I was on my phone at 1 a.m. because insomnia sucks. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell being rung frantically. My mom's a light sleeper, so she got up and went to the front door. She looked through the peephole of the door. I had walked out and she was standing there on her tiptoes at the front door. She was speaking to this guy behind the door. I heard a muffled guy's voice say, "My car's broken down. I need you to use your phone." My mom cleverly replied, "I'm sorry, I don't have a phone." She grabbed her phone after saying that. The man insisted and tried to open the door. He then got angry because the door was locked and started shouting. I went to my brother and woke him up. I told him to be quiet and we ran to the bathroom. My mom eventually joined us. We hid in the bathroom together and held on to each other. It felt like a lifetime in that bathroom. My mother was on the phone with 911 the entire time. I was making sure my brother remained quiet. When my mom told us that the cops were there, she made sure that when she heard them knocking, it was them. She gave them a statement. I couldn't hear it all because my brother and I were in the bathroom together. My mom told us that we could get out, and I immediately called my dad in tears. He answered and I was crying so hard that my dad couldn't understand me, so I gave the phone to my mom. A while later, the cops came back and told my mother that they had got the guy, and he didn't even have a car. His intentions were probably to break in and rob us, or worse. So my city is under the state of emergency because of the whole COVID situation, and the streets are fairly dead, especially late at night, even though I live on a busy street. I was taking my dog out to go pee around 4:30 in the morning. Our backyard isn't fenced, so I basically take her out on a walk around the house. But when I get to the driveway, I saw a man on the side of the road just standing there facing my direction. He was wearing all black with a hoodie and the hood up because that's the creepiest thing you can do. So, of course, right? Anyway, I brush it off and just want my dog to pee quick so I can get inside. My dog is super reactive, and she doesn't notice him because she's too busy sniffing out where to pee. But then this guy starts snapping, like over and over again, snapping his fingers. Thankfully, my dog was still preoccupied, but I wasn't about to wait around for this weirdo to pull anything. So I turned around and walked back up my driveway. He's still snapping, but I swear, I hear him walking. I wasn't about to turn around to find out. I just booked it up the back steps and into my house. I told my roommate, and we were both pretty freaked out and started checking out all the windows, but he was nowhere to be found. My dog's been on guard since coming inside. She's running from the front door to the back door. If I ever get snapped out again, I'm moving out. This happened about 9 years ago. I was living with a roommate at the time in a townhouse in a suburb of Denver. My boyfriend at the time had always been kind of abusive, with the occasional slap or pinning me down on the floor. But after a family member that he was close to committed suicide, he really lost it. My ex, Pierce, just lost it in the middle of an argument one day, about a week after the funeral, and threw me onto the ground, punching my arm over and over again until there was a giant bruise on one of my shoulders and a handprint shaped bruise on the other. My face ended up being swollen and I had a bloody lip. My roommate called the police and he ended up being arrested and a no contact order was put in place. He was also ordered to go to counseling and maybe drug and alcohol meetings, even though at the time he didn't use. Fast forward a few months. I'm living with this roommate because I was completely financially dependent on my ex. She had taken it upon herself to pay for me to get my GED. That woman is a saint. I just needed to throw that out there. A lot of time was spent on studying for the subjects. After everything, I was very agoraphobic, and I even managed to forge some online friends, and maybe even something more with a generally nice guy. One day, Pierce's grandma stopped by to take me to pay my phone bill. She lived close by in a small townhouse complex that was more or less behind where I lived. I remember it being the first beautiful and slightly warm day after a long winter. So I opened all the blinds to let the sunlight in and left them open when I left. After paying my bill, Pierce started calling her. I wasn't too concerned because I knew that he was supposed to be in court, mandated counseling shortly. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his grandmother told him that we had just stopped at McDonald's. Again, not an issue at this point. I continued to eat my Big Mac or whatever, until maybe 3 minutes later, Pierce calls again. His grandma tells him that she's probably going to go home in about 10 minutes. The call ends, I finish my food and we leave. Again, in the car, as I'm maybe 2 minutes away from where I live, Pierce calls again. I still can't hear his side of the conversation, but his grandma tells him the intersection we just passed, and suddenly, I have this terrible sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew something is wrong, but I can't identify what. I know in my heart of hearts that something was very wrong. I considered asking his grandmother for help, but for context, his grandmother on multiple occasions watched Pierce hit me and try to strangle me, and openly expressed disgust at how I can't help piss him off. This same lady that knew her daughter, Pierce's mother, broke Pierce's nose when he was 6 because he saw his mother flip someone off and copied her, and she did nothing to intervene. The family member Pierce was mourning for often told him he was fucked up and was probably more verbally and emotionally abusive person I've ever witnessed in my life, or in any movie, book, or whatever. So his family is just super fucked up and abusive. To other people, to each other. So I'm completely alone in this situation. Anyway, his grandmother pulls out in front of where I live, and I notice the blinds that I had left open are now closed. We go inside. Once she leaves, I walk upstairs to my room and see a random Word document open on my computer. Pierce had written a whole page worth of shit, but I only paid attention to the big words at the top. I read your emails. Immediately, I knew that he had seen the emails between me and the guy I met. Even though they weren't outright sexual or flirty, you could kind of tell that there was something there. My brain stopped reading at this point, and I needed to figure out if he was still in the building. Because there's a no contact order, I know he would have come in through the back door, so no one would see him. So my mind latches on to the idea that if the back door is locked, he is probably gone. I run downstairs to the door and see that it's locked. As soon as I reached the door, I hear a closet sliding open from the room I was just in. Loud angry footsteps, and he's yelling my name. I know this may sound weird, but I can't recall exact details. I remember his face in mine before I could understand what was happening. I remember being back in my room again, and I think to go through all the emails with him. And I remember him slapping me hard in my face until I got dizzy. I remember somehow convincing him to let me use my phone to respond to one of my roommate's texts. I don't remember what I said, but I remember that she called right away. I remember Pierce standing 2 feet away from me, looking at me, believing he was gonna kill me, and my roommate asking me, "Are you safe?" I only said, "No." She told me that she was on her way and would be there as fast as she could. Eventually, Pierce became convinced that I had called the police, and with a knife in his hand, told me that if they were coming anyway, he might as well give me what I deserve. I managed to convince that I didn't call the police. Then he started crying about what a terrible person he was and threatened to kill himself with that knife. So, with a handprint on my swollen face, I tried to convince him that he wasn't terrible and to please not kill himself, till my roommate came home. Insane ex-boyfriend. I've moved states, had my name changed, and only feel safe in buildings in big cities where I'm at least 3 stories up. Let's not ever meet again. This happened 2 summers ago. While I was house sitting out in California for an older couple, I had met at a conference for work. It seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats. I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again because I loved it so much the first time I had went. We figured we could mutually benefit if I came to house sit for them. I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days. Taught me how to take care of their cats, 2 of them. One was extremely shy, and I barely saw, which is important later. Also, their plants, and gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous. Before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport, and was on my own. At first, it was really a dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and taking trips into San Fran, Sonoma, Monterey. In the morning, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the path surrounding the nearby Mountain Diablo, and was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there. Then one day, about halfway through the final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself, went to bed, and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had even seen her up close. The entire time I had been there up to this point, she never left the host's bedroom, unless I wasn't around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed that she decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that halfway through the night that I heard someone walking around the gravel outside my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else, and I went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping, and had an overall great day. When I got home to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower, second lock, and that's the only lock my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt. But it was definitely locked. So I had to call my host to find a hide key which, safety-wise, was buried a whole foot underneath a bush outside and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did. But with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back in the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty unnerved. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind, I was trying to come up with a way that the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked and just wrote it off and started triple checking the locks when I went out of the house or into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, but again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I felt awful, nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in for Netflix for a day. The vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into a feeling of being watched. After mid-afternoon, I got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple of food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. And as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening." I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier, because I just had this thought that this might be the last person to ever say that to me. When I got to my car, I was still crying and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I could not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself, after about a half an hour, to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would be able to get over it and be able to at least go in and feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go stay at a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me go inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house and say, I already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone leave the house. So I faced inside the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and did just that. The second I finished saying, "They're almost here. If you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in the host room turned on, and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to my car and called the police for real. I proceeded to leave and have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the entire house and didn't find anyone, but the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open, and there's a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. They said they could not prove that anyone was there. There was no sign of forced entry, and we couldn't get hold of the host immediately to verify if anything had been taken. So they said that they would patrol a bit, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in the host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there for at least 2 days, forcing the cat to choose between two strangers, and leading her to choose the one that was least strange, which was me. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person, and I still had to stay in the house over the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel like anything was off for the rest of the time I was there. But the damage was done. I never felt completely safe in that house without doing a complete search before bedtime, but I'm extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife Alexa and I were settled down for a night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home is situated right against the street. Our home is situated across the street from a Presbyterian church with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one particular across the street and downwards a bit that owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog ever to exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10:15 p.m. and we are laying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's nothing much we can do except maybe confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be that neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car was not there. I decided to walk up and ring the doorbell anyways. After a minute with no one answering, I gave up and headed back towards home. I noticed Alexa had stepped outside and was looking towards the direction of the barking. I told her no one was home and that we should just either ignore it or finally file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day at work or trying to get some sleep. Alexa and I head back inside for a bit, and finally after 10 minutes the dog ceases to bark. Alexa and I exhale and laughed a bit before continuing our film. But of course, not long after, the dog starts up again. This time, it sounded vicious. I got up, went outside, and approached our neighbor's fenced-off backyard and saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me, and began to pant in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which it looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's so loud. I then heard something that sounded like someone walking through the leaves, coming from behind me and to the right. I turned around to see someone looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well. It sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction. As the dog continued to bark, I looked towards my house, where I saw Alexa standing next to her car, looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek were stained with red blood dripping down from his chin. In his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, then back at my home. Alexa, who was still outside, yelled out to me, asking what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why? The dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexa went inside to grab her phone as I continued to watch the person, who now began to back off, the dog now going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time for the police to reach my home, so I readied myself to go in self-defense mode, as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me seriously, but investigated the area as I explained to Alexa about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexa and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows and decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. Okay, this happened to me last year. Keep in mind, this is told in the perspective of a female. I started school at a local community college. I was looking to make new friends since I never really had the opportunity before. I was a weird fat kid throughout elementary and high school. College was a chance for me to reinvent myself, to actually make friends and fit in for once. It's college. No one gives a fuck if you're weird. You're all just trying to get through finals, after all. Well, I had class with this one kid. Let's call him Creep, because that's what he was. Anyway, me and the Creep had our ITE class together. I'd see him every day, but didn't talk to him much. He stayed in his corner of the room. I sat with my friend and the older lady, we'll name Jay. I had a TARDIS backpack. Yeah, I know. It's not bigger on the inside, by the way. Anyway, he saw this and said it was cool. I said that was cool and we talked a bit about our interests as we walked to our next class. He was into cosplay, as was I, and we both enjoyed BBC programs along with anime. He seemed friendly, and I went about my day. Things got uncomfortable after that. He started showing up everywhere that I did. Mostly he would invite himself to lunch with me and my friend S. He was disgusting. We went to lunch one day, and he ordered this burger with peppers, onions, and mayo. Mayo is the bane of my existence, mind you. He didn't use napkins. The thing smelled terrible, and he wiped it on his already stained pants. It wasn't pleasant to say the least. He kept popping up places and inviting himself to lunch, and I was beyond done with him. I have a habit of attracting weird people. I don't know why. I was just ready to cut and run if it came to it. Anyway, he invited himself to lunch with me again when S wasn't present. He said he had a crush on S, and I knew S went through a bad breakup. I told him to leave her alone, but he was insistent on me seeing if she liked him. I said no, leave her alone. He left after that, and I enjoyed my shitty spaghetti. Then the freaky thing happened. I was leaving to go to my car one day when I ran into him. We talked a bit, but I was trying to get away from him, but he really insisted on talking. Eventually, I tried to excuse myself, saying that I was going to go to my car and I would talk to him later. He followed me. He said it was fine and walked with me towards my car. He then proceeded to tell me a funny story about him getting drunk and punching his crazy ex in the face. Like that would totally impress me or some shit. I did what any normal person would. I looked him in the eye and said, no. Got in my car and drove off. He fucked off and left me alone after that. That wasn't the really creepy part though. No. I learned a few weeks ago, he killed someone before. Apparently, he got into a fight and stabbed someone in self-defense. The circumstances were more than shady though, but the police in my area are pretty shitty. The guy the creep stabbed ended up dying. So yeah, I was stalked by someone who killed another person. Ain't I lucky? To start this off, I'm a 19-year-old female, and my friend is 18 and also female. This spring, my friend and I decided to go to the cemetery during the bright day to collect sweets. In our country there is a custom. After Easter, many people go clean the graves of their deceased relatives, and to honor the memory of them, we put sweets and other products. Other people can come to the cemetery and just pick up what lies on the graves, and thus also honor the memory of these people. That is what me and my friend decided to do. And about a half hour passed without any trouble. All of a sudden we see a quite drunk man, somewhere around his 60s or 70s, which was heading in our direction. He said he couldn't find his bike, and had a bag of candy we assumed he had stolen. Then he for some reason gave us a small bag of sweets, which he collected. We decided to continue the search for sweets, and went further into the cemetery. After a while, we noticed the same man was following us, at some distance. At first we thought he was just looking for candy too, like us. But after a while, it was noticeable that he was following us. After a while, he caught up to us and decided to start a conversation. First he asked us how old we were. My friend and I look younger than we really are, so we decided to say we were 15 years old for some reason, and he believed us. Then he began to ask us about our personal life, paying extra attention to my friend. Said he wasn't going to rape us, asked my friend if she's ever been with a guy at all. Then he decided to take a more decisive action and try to hug us both at once. We almost ran ahead of him trying to avoid this. Up to that point, my friend was answering very politely, but now she was scared, and I was super annoyed and was talking rudely, which is very unlike me. I said I didn't want him to go with us, but the strange man wouldn't listen. Fortunately, he saw someone that he knew and went with them. My best friend and I decided to run away from him, and we got away. We walked around the cemetery again for a while, constantly looking around, but never saw him again. When I was 12, I lived on the outskirts of town. On the end of my block was a large cemetery. My friends and I always talked about going there late at night, and one night we actually did. We all met up at Jake's house. There was 3 of us: Jake, Josh, and myself. We had our flashlights and one of those old camcorders. It was a quiet night, and we snuck out of the house and walked towards the cemetery. The cemetery was locked but wasn't guarded. There's a part of the gated off area that the ground was a little higher up on, and we were able to climb the fence and get into the graveyard from there. It was approaching 11:30 and was super quiet. We walked around for a while, and it was pretty uneventful, although it was creepy. We were shining our lights on what looked like an expensive gravestone when out of the corner of Jake's eye, he saw something move. Josh thought he saw something too, but I didn't notice anything. We shined the flashlights in the area, but didn't find anything, so we just kept walking. It was getting boring, so we decided to check out one last area before we left. We were looking at a row of what looked like children's gravestones when we heard a noise coming from our right. Jake, did you hear that? Yeah. Slowly, let's all shine our flashlights in that direction. On a count of 3. 1, 2. We all turned and shined our flashlights in the direction of the noise. And there was a man, a dirty man, staring back at us. He had an evil look on his face. I couldn't tell if he was homeless or what, but he did not look like a nice person. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. We slowly backed up, and that's when it happened. He started screaming on the top of his lungs and running towards us. We all turned around at once and ended up tripping over each other. He was now gaining on us. We got back up and started running, but by this point we were all turned around, and in the confusion had no idea where the lower part of the fence was. This caused us to split up, which was scary as shit. It's roughly 20 minutes after we ran from him and split up when I hear Jake scream. It sounded like it was coming from the other end of the cemetery. All of a sudden I see Josh bolting it in that direction with something in his hand, so I follow suit. We run over to the screams, and the man is dragging Jake by the leg, pulling him as Jake screams on top of his lungs, grabbing at everything. Just when we reached them, Josh swung something and hit the crazy man. I later found out that it was a piece of a tree that broke while Josh was hiding in it. The man fell down, and we bolted all together. At that point, Josh knew where we needed to go, so we followed him and got to the fence and jumped over. We ran back to my house, snuck in the window, and locked it. We don't know what the man wanted, or who he even was, but we're never going by that cemetery ever again, even if we have to take the long way to school. This happened well over 10 years ago, so I'll try my best to describe the events accurately. One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via a big double glass door in each of our rooms. Next to the balcony were 2 trees. One I would often climb up and down from my balcony. This balcony faced out towards the street. One night when I was 13, my brother and mother weren't home. I was reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of the trees outside, but it didn't worry me because possum and bats are common in our area. Now, I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separate my room and the balcony. As I mentioned previously, the doors face out towards the street, where the street lamp light was always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the rustling noises from the tree, I see a shadow slowly move past my doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze like a deer in headlights. The shadow was tall, so it wasn't one of our neighborhood kids that I'm friends with, and it wasn't my mother, which is 5 feet tall. The person moved slowly, creeping as if they were trying not to be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the streetlights behind them, creating a dark silhouette. They moved past my doors and out of sight. I sat there, unable to move or even think about what to do, other than being absolutely still. That is until I heard another sound, the sound of someone trying to open the glass door, my mom's doors, to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, and I wasn't taking any chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now. They were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief. This person couldn't get in, surely. All I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave, right? Well, I heard light footsteps moving back along the balcony to my set of glass doors, until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me. He couldn't know that I see him. I saw the shadow of a hand reach up to the door handle, and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked these doors myself today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity, but thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief. I was worried that he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile phone, as my mom thought I was too young to have one yet, and the landline was on the other end of our house, but I was too scared to take my eyes off this person, even to call for help. I was slightly crying, tears falling down my cheeks, as I internally prayed that they would just leave. Then I heard him stop moving. He then said, "I could just break the glass, you know." Before I could even process this, I saw a car headlights turn around the corner of my street, then stop at our property gate. My mom was home. The person moved out of sight and I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. My mom came inside and I was hysterical and barely coherent in telling her what just happened. Eventually I got the message across and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but my neighborhood reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been recently reported for attempting to abduct a child near my school a block away. Since I walked a short distance daily, the police suspected that he followed me or saw where I lived and waited for me to be home alone. So this happened last night. I'm a female, 25, and live alone in an apartment in not a very good part of my city. I was laying in bed watching Criminal Minds when the phone to the door to my apartment complex rang. It's a locked door, so visitors have to be let in. So it rang 4 or 5 times, and I wasn't expecting anyone. It was about 10 p.m., so I didn't open the door or answer the phone. I called my mom and told her I felt a bit scared. I have a history of abusive relationships and have been diagnosed with PTSD. My mom told me that it was probably just a neighbor who forgot their key or something. Then I heard the elevator come up, so I went to go look through the peephole in my door. I saw a man in dark clothes and a hoodie get out of the elevator and walk towards my door. I freaked out and told my mom, who was still on the phone with me. She told me to step away from the door, so I went to my bedroom. That was when the man started pulling on the door handle and then proceeded to pound on my door. I was really freaking out at this point, whispering to my mom what was happening. She told me to go lock myself in the bathroom while she called the police on my sister's phone. The police told my mom to tell me to mute my phone and hang up the call with her so they could call me. I did, and they called and told me to stay locked in the bathroom and to be quiet. At that same time, I could still hear the man trying to get in. The woman told me that they had a police on patrol only a couple minutes away. I was in full panic at that moment. After what felt like forever, the woman on the phone told me that 2 police officers were outside my door, so I had to get out of the bathroom and open the door for them. I was crying and hyperventilating when they entered. One of the officers stayed in my apartment for a while when the other searched the building. They never found the man. So here I am today, still freaking out of not knowing who the man was, or what he wanted.
I posted this on Backwoods Creepy a while back on this throwaway account. My wife suggested this sub might find it interesting as well. Here it goes. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all of the time. We could always manage it. Joe lived on a farm that borderlined a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me in the morning, and we would stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fires with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got into the notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based off the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was we'd walk through the railroad tracks out into the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find a really cool bridge to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains. At night we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic, in fact. It was so fun. We did it multiple times and never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but we always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we would see each other. One summer, in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both back in town for about a week. We would do stuff with our families in the day. At night, we'd either catch a drink at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and a couple of beers are a hell of a mix. We soon decided to take a day and walk the rails, camp one night, and then walk home. The day came and we started out in the early morning. We had my wife drop us off at the old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had maps, so I gave it the what the hell, and off we went. The day went fine, it was fun, and a little sad, but in a good kind of way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, then moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forest area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so it felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on. Before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days. We'd walk around the area just a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything on the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top of the hill, we saw an old building down at the bottom. About 100 yards into the woods, it was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be any clear road into it. From where we were, it didn't look like there was anyone inside it either. All was quiet, no movement, nothing could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer, just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it was abandoned for years, but it was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on the top of the place, also weathered in black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in the front for the preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was just an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of woods. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep, and move on early in the morning. Night set in, and as we laid in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went something like this. "Do you hear that? What the fuck is that?" It sounded like people singing, and it did. It sounded like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from inside the church, and the singing was also coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we could only see the occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After a booming male's voice began to chat, I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you would see in the movies, but again, it was like he was speaking a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put his hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walking out of the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them holding flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights, and we came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down the road, and we walked there. We went into a 24-hour gas station and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that ever happened to me out in the woods. This happened about 4 years ago. I just graduated from high school and was a month and a half into summer break. Needing money for college, I began working full-time for the school district I just graduated from. Due to a music festival that I wanted to attend to, as well as monetary concerns, I did not go with my family to North Carolina, which was fine by me. What 18-year-old doesn't want a house to themselves for a week? Furthermore, my parents' house is in the middle of the country, so I had little to no fear about my neighbors complaining about parties or being bothered in any way whatsoever. But I was wrong. I often take the back roads home from my friend's house, but on that night, I decided I wanted some McDonald's, so I took the main drag and came home on a different route. This way takes you past a mechanic's shop, not a mile away from our cul-de-sac. It was between midnight and 1 a.m. As I passed the mechanic's shop, I noticed a car's lights turning on, or should I say light, for this car only had one headlight working. I remember thinking that it was strange that this car all of a sudden turned its light on as I was passing, and I became ever more concerned when it pulled out behind me. But I tend to be paranoid by nature, nothing serious, but I always question if the person behind me is following me and whether they mean me harm, so I brushed this off as an unfortunate coincidence. But as I neared my street and the car was still tailing me, I started to become freaked out. I look at my gas tank and my heart sunk as I saw I was on E. Either I pull on my street and go home, or I risk driving around and seeing if this dude follows, yet that option held the risk on my car running out of gas and leaving me stranded on the road. I figured I'd rather take my chances on my own soil than on the side of some dark and lonely country back road. So I turned onto my street, only to have my heart sink when the one headlamped car makes the turn right behind me. At this point, I know I'm screwed. With nothing left to do, I began pulling up my driveway. It's a hill, about 10 yards long. To my utter horror, they begin to follow me up. Looking back, I should have called the cops, but there is no love lost between the law enforcement and myself at this time. I was too caught up to even consider calling them. If my family would have been home, this would have never happened. I could have called my dad, and he could have grabbed his gun, but he, along with the rest of my family, were gone, 12 hours away at the beach. So when they began to drive up my driveway after me, I stopped and put my car in reverse. They responded to my reversing as well, yet they stopped at the bottom, effectively blocking my driveway. At this point, I pulled forward again, only to have the same jig and dance happen. They follow, I reverse, they reversed and sat at the end, blocking my escape. I quickly pulled up and turned my car around to come at them head on. By this time they were halfway up my driveway, the furthest they had come. Looking back, I was terrified, alone, and angry. Who did this person think they were? With my brights on and shining right in their face, I opened my car door and got out. I pulled out my pocket knife and grasped it in my left hand and grabbed my hammer in the right. I used to keep one between my seats and door. In some weird, desperate mindset, I made a split-second decision to grab the hammer from the head with the handle sticking out. My hope was that they would mistake it for a gun. I began yelling and pointing my hammer/gun at the car, screaming to them, "Get the fuck out! What do you want, you motherfucker?" All the while, I held my hammer as a gun and prayed that they would fall for it. Whether they did or not, I cannot say. Part of me believes that they thought it was a gun, due to my brights being behind me and making my whole front side a shadow. They could have just not wanted a fight. Perhaps they thought I was a girl, or was timid, and wouldn't resist so aggressively and violently. Who knows, but it worked. They slowly backed out of my driveway and crept around the cul-de-sac. As they were leaving my street, I ran after them, hiding behind my neighbors' houses, and at every driveway, the car would slow down to a near stop, as if they were scoping out the houses. Thankfully, they didn't pull onto any driveways, and they turned off my street altogether. After I was safely in my house, I ate my McDonald's by the front window with all the lights turned off, waiting to see if they would come creeping back. Thankfully, they didn't, but that night I locked every door in my house, which I always did anyways, and slept with a hammer, machete, and baseball bat next to me and my pocket knife under my pillow. Completely overkill, I know, but I was terrified. Now I know where my dad keeps his gun, so if it ever happens again, I'll be prepared. Regardless though, whoever the hell was in that single headlighted car, let's not meet. So, I met a guy online recently that seemed sweet and kind. I decided to set up a date on Friday, and everything is going well. That is, until yesterday. I get a message telling me that he wants to hang out tomorrow morning, and I agree, thinking that we would just go for Starbucks, and he'd come around the time we agreed. I go to sleep with a smile on my face. Instead, I wake up to a phone call around 8 a.m. Surprise, I answer it, and it's my date. Hey, are you up yet? I just woke up. I don't care how you look. Also, your mom freaked me out. My mom? Yeah, she saw me parked across from your house. She waved and I waved back. She was kind of creepy. What time did you come over here? 5:30 a.m.? My heart sinks. I had no idea that someone I was casually meeting for coffee would show up super early to my house and wait for me to wake up. After the phone call, I check my messages. I see 5 messages from 5 in the morning. A picture of my house with a message. Do you live here? The next message says, someone spotted me, so I moved, along with a picture of my neighbor's house nearby. Obviously, I freaked out myself, and I knew that my mother and neighbors were probably equally as freaked out. I started panicking and texting my friends on my phone, desperate to see if anyone was awake and could help me at all. I get one reply on a group chat, but out of fear of judgment, I lie to her saying I got the situation handled. I convince myself to go out and confront this guy. Hi, princess, how are you? I noticed him on my neighbor's yard, probably trying to look for me in their windows. Shaking, I try to fake a smile and let him hug me. Then he goes in for a kiss, wet, messy, and with tongue. I felt frozen on what to do. I tried telling him that coming at 5 a.m. to wait for me isn't a cool thing to do, but he gives me the excuse that he wanted to beat traffic and not drive sleepy, as he works nights. I try to see things from his perspective, and shaking it off, I go off into his car, and he and I try to have something close to a regular date, which usually doesn't include groping, licking my neck multiple times, and talking about marriage right away so I could have babies. I managed to convince him to drop me off far from home and let me walk back to my house, that is, until I realized he was following me in his car, and when I asked him about it, he asked if I wanted him to walk me to my house. Even more scared, I tell him no, and manage to escape. By the time I arrive home, I'm in tears and extremely shaky. I text him that I don't think we're compatible and never to come near me or my family again. In response, he tells me that I'm shit. From that, I think I'm gonna take a break from online dating. This is a messed up story with so many details that I'm not sure how to structure it, but I'll do my best. I'll probably forget to add some parts. I'll divide it into chapters or parts so it'll be easy to navigate through. I used to live in Stockholm, Sweden. There I attended high school and met my then boyfriend Jack. He will come into play later. I was very active on social media then. I had a GIFO back when that was a thing. I used to use GIFs to link to my blog and show makeup, hairstyles, etc. For those who don't know what GIFO was, it was basically Instagram, but for only GIFs. Back in the day, I had a pretty large following on that site, but that site did have its downsides, particularly the nasty, sexual messages you would get quite often. Part 1. The meeting. Then this person, Robin, started following me and was so nice and friendly. It felt genuinely like Robin wished me all the best and made me happy whenever he or she would write. Robin said that he or she was a male, 23 at the time, and was from the US, but that he had some Swedish relatives. I thought that was pretty dope, and we would chat a few times a month in English. I also loved to sing, and I uploaded covers to YouTube. Robin would be so excited when I released new covers and complimented me. I'd feel great. It was so nice to have an online friend who seemed truly happy for me, though this behavior started to become too much sometimes, and it started to feel wrong. Part 2. The flags. Robin then sent me a drawing. He said it was a portrait of me, It was a girl with animal ears, making a cute pose with her hands, piercing green eyes and whiskers. He said it's like me, but mixed with a cat, my favorite animal. I was beyond impressed. It was so cute, and I was flattered that someone would draw me. But that excitement turned to ash in my mouth one night. This is where it all started for real, where the flag should have gone up. I play League of Legends, and one of my favorite champions back then was Ari, especially in her Firefox skin. I was scrolling through Safari on my phone to find a wallpaper of her to have on my phone, and then I see the picture, the fan art Robin made, only that the eyes were now yellow, like Aris. I clicked the picture, and it linked me to a DeviantArt account. Casual cute Foxfire Ari posted 3 years ago. I wrote Robin and told them how I was upset that he stole a drawing from an artist, edited the colors a bit, and claimed to have worked hard, making it himself. I explained to him how awful it is to take someone else's work and say that you made it yourself. He said he was ashamed and sorry, and said he only wanted to impress me and to make me smile. I couldn't stay mad at him for long, but I was wary now. It had been a while since I posted a cover, and Robin made sure as hell I knew it had been a while. He would nag and plead with me to make another one, to the point that I told him to back the flipping burgers off. I posted a cover a few weeks later. Part 3. Too Close to Comfort. I broke up with Jack, the boyfriend. We went our different ways and it was okay. Robin, on the other hand, was not. He couldn't, for the sake of humanity, grasp why he had broken up and pleaded yet again, but this time it was a pleading for me to get back together with my boyfriend. I tolerated this at first because to most people we seemed perfectly happy together, Jack and I. I got really upset with him because after a few days, on the end, he would ask if we were getting back together, and I just explained that Jack was unfaithful, seeing other girls and flirting with them. The response, "Oh, but you can't forgive him? Not getting back?" I was done. I told him to leave me alone. He did. Part 4. Found out. It was just like last time, scrolling on the internet, and I thought one night that I wanted to listen to others doing the same cover that I did. I started scrolling through the list, and I see my face on a thumbnail with the caption, "Song name, cover by me." This was not my video, not my YouTube account. My heart froze. I felt myself grow cold. I clicked and my audio started playing. It was my voice, my picture, but not my name. I clicked on the profile, and the coldness intensified. Every cover of me, every video of me from my own YouTube, Instagram, friends' YouTube, Jack's YouTube, and SoundCloud were on there. The videos dated back 2 whole years. The account said that her name was Jenny, and that she was the one singing, producing the music, hell, even going as far as taking videos of my relatives and saying that was her family. I was confused, scared, and angry. Who would do this? I got my answer with the most twisted thing I ever experienced online. In the comment to the videos were comments from Robin's account. Robin, "Thank you so much, Jenny, for dedicating this song to me." Jenny, "Oh, no bother, Robin. I made it all for you." It was like this stalker was either 2 stalkers, or this person had made up 2 characters and was talking to him, herself, through the comments. This freaked me out big time. I wrote to all my friends whose content was stolen. I wrote to my ex and his new boyfriend, now fiancé, and told them to help me shut this thing down. The account was shut down within 20 hours. I blocked all accounts linked to Robin, including the Jenny accounts. I locked all social medias, removed everyone I didn't know in real life. I googled image reverse all of my profile pictures and nothing came up. I was paranoid for about a year after this, and I didn't trust anyone I didn't know in real life. Part 5. The Aftermath. Robin made new accounts to follow me, which I blocked. I have an official Instagram for work and such, which he or she could be looking at. but it's something I've now just accepted will happen, and that I shouldn't live in internet fear because of one person. Just a month ago, I logged into Tumblr because I wanted to see if I had some juicy memes stashed somewhere. Yeah, I know, cringe. Then I saw blocked accounts. Only one blocked. Guess who? Robin had changed the Tumblr blog from his or her Robin fakery to something new, something personal. The blog was filled with angst, just like other Tumblrs, but this one was filled with self-hatred posts, extremism, racism, and long posts written in Swedish. This was the first time it hit me. This person was Swedish. I told my best friend to go through the blog to see if her FBI skills could sniff something out, and she did. I'll combine all of the evidence that her and I combined know so far. Part 6. The conclusion. The stalker is probably born in 1989, and he or she lives in the same part of the city as my parents, where I lived before. Gender not sure, seems to depend. The stalker couldn't go to high school with me, but must have known me through somewhere else, mutual friends, or something. He or she stole my content for years, pretending to be my friend to get more content, and is probably still checking in on me. My best guess that this is a girl who wanted to be me, have my life and my boyfriend. When I stopped creating new content and broke up with Jack, her whole made-up world started to fall apart. If Robin somehow reads this, I hope you find acceptance and happiness in yourself, because it's no life living it through someone else. Go in peace. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women until I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck on there either until like the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which is odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, and it definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more begging from her, I finally said that I would take the drive and go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt who she said that she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some points, I took more than 30 minutes to respond, and she would send me a slew of annoying texts. Admittedly, I chalked this up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came onto an odd-looking house. A window on the 2nd floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse from where. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in the front of the driveway. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the windows on the 2nd floor. I found it a little creepy, but I figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered the door with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which gave me a surprise, and I followed her inside. We sat down on the couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or—" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said we had to get out of there now. We both ran to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last. He was looking at us from the window again. I got a better view of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took a half hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally showed up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back a little later and told me and Katie, while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was open. Whoever it was ran out of the house and into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in her house alone right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bed was in the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she had never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, feeling safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke Katie up and told her what happened, and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it would probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother, telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned out of there, and never even bothered calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever went back to that house alone. This happened about 14 years ago, when I was in my second year of university and living in a student flat. I was 19 at the time and very into MySpace and used to chat with friends and friends of friends on there. A few of my friends were models, which is how I stumbled across this guy Joe. Joe was a professional photographer, and he was starting to really make a name for himself with his edgy and provocative photos. With hindsight, I can see he was just a Terry Richardson wannabe, which should have been a giant red flag in itself. But at the time, I thought his style was cool and his work was impressive. He was working with celebrities and shooting for big fashion magazines, so I was really surprised when he replied to my message complimenting him on his work. We started talking regularly, and soon he was very keen to come and visit me. He was living in London, and I was studying in Winchester, which is just over an hour by train, so I didn't think it would be a big deal. I eventually agreed, and I met him at the station. From the start, he was very intense. He grabbed my face and started kissing me hard as soon as he saw me. I was pretty taken aback. He suggested we go back to my place to watch a film, and I agreed, which was the first of many stupid mistakes. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna go into explicit detail. Stuff happened. It was all fine and consensual to start, but it quickly escalated into some rougher stuff and him pushing pretty hard for more. I said no, and he proceeded to give me the whole "I came all this way out to see you, and you're gonna be like this" guilt speech. I wish I could go back in time and tell my teenage self to kick him out, but I was young and stupid, and I didn't want to be rude. However, I did stand my ground, and we didn't have sex, but he also wouldn't leave. He said it was too far to travel back, and it was getting late, so he'd have to stay over. I had one of the most uncomfortable sleepless nights of my life, and I was too embarrassed to tell my housemates what was going on. Thankfully, he left first thing in the morning, and I hoped to never speak to him again. He tried messaging a few times, and I didn't reply, but this isn't the end of the story. Cut to a few years later, and I see some friends on Facebook posting about Joe. They're sharing horror stories about him. Turns out, a few other girls I knew had similar experiences with him, along with the news that he had been charged with a few counts of sexual assault. Apparently, his success as a photographer gave him the position of power he needed to force himself on young models under the premise of getting them more work in magazine covers. Several news sites picked it up, particularly because of his celebrity connections. He was sentenced to 33 months in prison and banned from working with children and vulnerable adults. I definitely got off lucky and felt extremely guilty for not sharing my experience with friends earlier, but that's not the end of the story either. Cut to about 6 years ago, I was working in social media at a big agency in London. I hated it, and I was using LinkedIn a lot to try to find a new job. I got a message from a guy who I didn't know about some potential freelance work. He said he was starting an agency which could potentially lead to more full-time work down the line. He suggested we meet up at a well-known hotel to talk more. This seemed a little odd to me, but I was really keen on leaving where I was working. In the middle of planning this, he messages saying, "You don't recognize me, do you?" His avatar wasn't a close-up photo, so I opened it up to take a closer look and froze. It's Joe, but with a different name. Apparently he changed it after he was released. I was so shocked and angry. I couldn't believe he almost lured me to meet him again. I told him I had no intention of meeting up with him, and he told me not to believe anything I read. Needless to say, I disconnected from him on LinkedIn. I just went through my old LinkedIn messages to find ones from him and did a search for his new name on Google. I don't know if it's the same guy, but the second search result that came up against his name is details of an arrest for a violent crime in 2015, and his LinkedIn account is now disabled. He seems to have disappeared again. Let's hope it's for good this time. Let's not meet.
Last year, I was hiking in Virginia. It was a planned 2-day hiking trip, myself and 2 friends. Late into the first day, one of my friends grew ill and decided to turn back. The second friend joined him, just in case it got worse. They told me to go on, and seeing that I had been looking forward to the trip, I did. As evening approached, I came to a clearing in the forest. On a table, surrounded by tools and several cans of spray paint, was an elaborate dollhouse. It was large, perhaps 3 feet tall. Its walls and windows were open, as if it had just been built and was drying. That lingering smell of spray paint still hung in the air around it. On the back of the house, a photo had been fixed. It was a family picture, old perhaps, taken in the 80s. Everyone in the picture looked very uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be taking the picture, or were forced to. Not scared, just very uncomfortable. I left it and continued on so that I might reach my planned campsite by nightfall. The wind had picked up considerably. In the distance, I heard a branch give and fall, crashing to the forest floor, startling me. I found my campsite, but was a bit unnerved by the dollhouse in the middle of nowhere. I realized I didn't want to camp out in the open, where whoever was working on it might stumble upon me. I had one of those little one-person tents that stand just tall enough for a person to lay down in. I set up behind a thick stand of bushes, one side blocked off by a tall stand of rocks. I was glad for this. Not only was I hidden, but the rocks effectively blocked the heavy winds, which had now turned cold as the frigid air tumbled down from the mountains at night. The sound of the wind-churned forest was relaxing, and I think I fell asleep right away.
Have you ever been woken up by a loud sound and you're unsure of what it was exactly, but some remnant of it echoes in your mind for a moment after waking? This is what happened to me sometime later in the pitch dark. I had the sensation that someone was near. I listened intently, trying to hear over the wind. I heard a man's voice somewhere in the distance, harsh, rapid, then becoming softer. He was too far away from me to discern what he was saying, but close enough that I could hear inflection and cadence. It sounded like a crazy person scolding himself. Then his voice became softer and answering. As I listened, his voice grew louder and louder until I could hear his clumsy footfalls crashing towards me. He walked right by where I was camped, just several feet away from the brush that concealed me. By now, my eyes had adapted somewhat to the pale moonlight, but I still couldn't make anything out more than a large, massive shape. He was probably about 6'6", heavy built. He was carrying something long between his arms, a rolled-up tent perhaps. He was angrily talking about how someone's face haunted him. His voice became childlike, and his conversation with himself turned to the topic of cheese and crackers. This dude was clearly off his rocker, that or high off something really good. After a moment, he continued on, his voice receding until I could no longer hear him. I slept little that night afterward. At first light, I booked it back to the way I came, back to town. I noticed that the dollhouse was not in the clearing where I had passed by. Whoever that stranger in the night was, I'm glad we did not meet.
You know those things that you grow up with thinking are pretty ordinary scary stuff that everyone at one point encounters? Like almost getting into a bad accident. That's how I felt about almost getting abducted from my front yard. It wasn't until college, when I'd occasionally mention this incident, that I fully processed the magnitude of what had happened. Maybe that's why to this day I'm so paranoid. But what gets me the most is how truly random these acts are and how many different circumstances have to fall into place for such events to even happen. For one, it was not raining, which for Portland, Oregon is nearly miraculous when it's not summer. In fact, it was a gorgeous day outside with clear skies. Second, my mom was home. Growing up at the time with a live-in nanny due to my dad's travels and my mom's constant being on call at the clinic, true parental supervision was a rarity. And so these factors united when my mom locked the TV room and told my sister at the age of 5 and me at the age of 7 that we needed to spend more time outside. We had a yard for a reason, she said. And so we went out to our front yard, which for context was slanted steeply. There were about 40 steps to get to our gate by the street. My sister and I situated ourselves in the grass about halfway down the steps from the house with our American Girl dolls in tow. We lived on a quiet side street in a safe suburban area of Portland, the West Hills for those familiar. The biggest instances typically involved a drunk teenager crashing into a neighbor's car. Crime never happened. Hence, my extremely type A and overprotective mom, scared by all the things that go wrong with her patients, treated her children with an impressive amount of paranoia. However, even she felt comfortable leaving us outside unsupervised. While playing, an unusual-looking pickup truck caught the side of my eye. It was vintage-looking and light green. Then suddenly, the truck slowed down as it neared our house and came to a near stop by our yard. Since he was on the opposite side of the street, the driver then did an illegal U-turn in the middle of the street and maneuvered his truck so he was directly adjacent to our yard. Even then, I thought nothing of it. It's Portland. Even by that age, I met a cast of characters. However, The hair went up on my neck as he stepped out of the car and stood directly outside our gate. He yelled to us, asking for help and telling us to come down. His dog is sick, he said, and if we come down, he had some candy for us. My sister, forever a sugar fiend, started to get up excitedly. The man slowly opened our gate, anticipating us. I had a sickening feeling about him and grabbed my sister's hand. "He's a bad guy. Go inside," I told her. And we screamed and ran inside, quickly locking the door. My mom came to the door to see what the commotion was, but by the time she looked outside, the car was gone. She stopped pushing us to go outside after that. A final circumstance I should mention was that just a few weeks prior in my first grade classroom we had our first stranger danger talk where they showed you black and white photos of scenarios and tell you how to react. And they told us about the predator's tactics, such as asking for help, offering candy, or mentioning animals. Verbatim, I was warned about these tactics, and long behold, this aspiring child abductor tried it on me a few weeks later. We were fortunate he wasn't creative. I never did see that distinctive car again, but creepy man in the green truck, let's keep it that way. This incident happened to me over the Christmas holidays this past year, and it just occurred to me that the sheer insanity of it may make a good fit for this sub. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. My cousin and I decided to go up a few hours north for a nice winter weekend. It went great. Nothing creepy at all. On our final day, we packed up at 6 a.m. and hopped in our car to get an early start on the 5-hour drive we had ahead of us. It was a foggy morning. Not actively snowing, but previous snowfalls had piled up quite a bit, making the drive a little risky in the dark, early hours of the morning. My cousin was driving, and we're chatting and listening to podcasts, not too aware of our surroundings. We were about 20 minutes into the drive when, unfortunately, the car skidded off the road a little. Damn you, black ice. And we were slightly grazed by a tree. We got out to take a look, and by some miracle there was no damage or anything on the car. As my cousin and I started to laugh with relief, we were just thinking our luck. I shielded my eyes because of some idiot with their crazy high beams coming up behind us. So obnoxious, my cousin laughed, starting to open her door to step back inside when the blinding headlights car honks and continues to keep at it as they approach us. My cousin and I looked at each other, super confused, but quickly hopped back in the car. The car begins to slow down, and we're able to see a man in the driver's seat, and he finally takes his hand off of the horn and pulls up right next to my cousin's car, which is really dumb because we were off the road because it was crazy slippery. He rolls down his window and motions for my cousin to roll down ours. We figure it's fine because he's still inside his car and we're still inside ours. I know, probably still a stupid move. "Hey there, ladies. In a rush this morning?" He laughs. Not really. Just trying to get home. Can we help you with something?" My cousin replies, totally stone-cold poker face. "Oh no, I just noticed you dropped something about 2 kilometers back, and it fell out of your trunk." My cousin turned to look at me. "Did you shut the trunk when we left?" "Yeah, dude, obviously," I replied, and knowing the way the car is shaped, we would have seen and definitely heard an open trunk. "No thanks, sir. I think you may have mixed us up with someone else." my cousin said, and immediately rolled up her window. This man just gave off bad vibes. He started blaring his horn again and motioning us to roll down the window. My cousin rolls it down again and sees him holding up some women's underwear and smiling. "See? Does this look familiar?"
Oh yeah.
I can literally remember the exact tone with which he said that. "No thanks, sir. You have a great day now." My cousin quickly rolled up her window again and floored it, quickly hopping back onto the road, and thankfully the man was either taken back or just gave up and we didn't see him for the next hour or so. My cousin and I were both a little shaken up, but we tried to laugh it off since we were safe and hadn't seen his car follow us or anything. At about 2 hours into our trip, we had gotten off on an exit to fill up gas and grab some breakfast at a Starbucks. My cousin and I mobile ordered, and I had gonna quickly run to grab the food and drinks. It started snowing at this point, and while the sun had been up for a little bit, it was still foggy and gloomy, making it hard to see the surroundings. I ran in. As I reached for our food, someone's arm reached over mine to grab a napkin, and I instantly flinched back. When I looked up, I truly almost shat myself. It was the frickin' man! Despite him never getting out of his car, he did have his lights on, and I was able to get a clear view of his face. It was him. I was sure of it. "Look at us, just like old friends." He smiled at me. I immediately looked down, grabbed my food, and started walking out of the store. As I left, I heard him talking to the barista saying, "See, that's my beauty queen. That's my beauty queen." What the hell? I almost had tears in my eyes because I was so terrified. I power walked back to the car, almost tripping outside because I was so scared and not walking like a normal person. I hopped in and screamed, "We need to get the hell back on the road. He's inside this frickin' Starbucks." My cousin started laughing, thinking I was pranking her, but she quickly realized that that was not the case when the man walked out of the Starbucks a few seconds later, with no drink or food in hand, walking straight towards our car, waving at us. My cousin quickly started to turn the car on when the man reached into his pocket. I genuinely thought he was pulling out a weapon, holding up the underwear he had before.
Smells good.
Thankfully, my cousin took no time in backing out of there and speeding back onto the highway. We both were freaking out at this point, not sure how this ended up to being the same stop and us despite not seeing him behind us at all. He could have taken some back roads we didn't know about, right? But it would have taken him much longer than us to get there. Unless he was trailing behind us, I don't know. We quickly tried to find an alternate route on our Maps app, and thankfully there was one that made us go through some local roads which we hoped might help. Of course, with our luck, as we were going through a smaller town, I felt the car getting gradually lower on my side. We pulled over at a well-lit gas station and realized that we were losing air pressure in one of the tires. We were both too scared to get out, but figured if we went out together it might be less scary. So we did. We filled up the tire with some air and it seemed to be okay. We got back in the car, back on our way. Everything seemed fine until 10 minutes later when this car seemed to appear out of nowhere directly behind us. My cousin and I looked at each other, having no idea what to do if it was the man. Our suspicions were confirmed when he blared his stupid horn yet again, then quickly swerved off the road to get right next to us. So this time, he was on my side. He had his window rolled down and was screaming at us. At this point, I gave zero fricks and called my brother-in-law, who was a cop. I know, I should have called the police directly. It was a stupid move, but in the moment, I was just trying to justify this as not being something serious. My brother-in-law told us to drive directly to the nearest police station and to call them right away so they would be on alert. Literally, as he was instructing me, the creep braked his car. Just stopped on the side of the snowy, icy road. We were still speeding away so quickly it got harder and harder to see him, but from what I could make out, he had gotten out of his car and was sitting on the hood. Just freaking sitting on the hood of his car in freezing snowy weather. My cousin and I did not want to stop or do anything with about an hour left in our journey. We decided to just book it straight home, and thankfully that was the end of that. I know we made a lot of stupid mistakes that could have potentially had horrible consequences, but I'm super happy that we made it out alive and unharmed. I still don't know how he caught up to us seemingly magically, or why he just sat there at the end, but I don't want to find out at this point. I used to do DoorDash on the side for some extra cash. This was in the summer of 2018, when it was a little bit newer. At least in my town it was. Since then, I think they've made a lot of changes, but at the time, it was a little unorganized. If you don't know what DoorDash is, it's like a food service delivery type of thing for restaurants that don't deliver, like McDonald's. Anyways, the one night I was doing deliveries all day, I decided to do my last delivery around 10 p.m. So I get an order in, and the person wants a medium cheese and pepperoni pizza and loaded potato wedges from a pizzeria nearby. I was kind of wondering why they'd order from a pizzeria that delivers, but I figured it's because this place was notorious for taking forever when you order for delivery. I accepted the order and headed to the pizzeria. I got there and picked up the pizza, confirmed it on the app that I was picking everything up and on my way. The app notified me of the special instructions that the customer asked for, which was to call them when I was outside. Okay, nothing unusual there. Lots of people asked that so they could come out to me. I get to their address and it's downtown. It's a larger apartment building and it's completely pitch black, and I instantly get that eerie feeling. So I pull up to the curb, staying in the car. Hell no, I wasn't about to go near that building, and called the number. Luckily, DoorDash has this thing that hides your actual phone number. It rings a couple of times, and then this really creepy woman's voice comes on the line and says, "We can't come to the phone right now. We're a little tied up."
Ooh.
And then, creepily giggles meanwhile the entire time in the background. There's another woman screaming. And I mean, screaming for help, and like for her life. It even got louder as the creepy woman was purposely putting the screaming woman on the phone. I instantly hung up and drove off real quick, not even knowing which direction to go. Luckily, there was a super popular restaurant a couple of blocks away, and I pulled into that parking lot and pulled up the app. I was worried about getting in trouble for not being able to deliver the order, so I contacted DoorDash Help Center, and they told me that I had to wait 15 minutes to see if they'd call me or message me about their food. Well, they never called, and thank God for that. I'm sitting there in the parking lot of the restaurant telling my mom about it, and we agree that it's probably a prank, but that just in case it isn't, I need to call the police. So I called the non-emergency number and told them everything. The police tell me they're going to do a wellness check and actually thanked me for calling them to tell them about it. I went home, and nothing ever came of it, but I still think of it from time to time. I did get a free pizza and potato wedges though, so that was cool. Creepy lady in the apartment, let's not meet. And to the lady screaming, I hope you're safe and okay. I work from home doing beauty treatments. And last summer, I was working 6 to 7 days a week, 9:30 a.m. through 9:30 p.m., doing nails and drowning in a god-awful chemical smell, so I would end each night airing my house with all the windows open for a few hours. One night, I sat on the sofa while the place aired, and browsing my laptop for TV units. I had just moved in a few months before. As I slouched on the sofa, a creepy feeling rolls over me. Something at the corner of my eye catches my attention, and I look to my window. I notice my blind is bent inwards, revealing a black slit of the outside. I stare deep into the darkness, trying to figure out if my blind got caught when a man's voice says,
Hey there.
I instantly look away, heart pounding. The blind falls back into place and I hear his fading footsteps as he walks away. God knows how long he'd been standing there watching me, and thank God I was only looking at TV units. I was terrified and immediately rushed around and closed all of my windows. When I was closing the window to my beauty room, I noticed a man a few meters away crouched down and shining a torch under the tree. A few minutes later, there was a tapping at my now closed kitchen window. I didn't check it out. I was too scared. I still don't know if the guy under the tree was the same "hey there" guy, or someone looking for something he'd lost perhaps. There was also a guy who had been going around beating up and mutilating cats around that time, so I was extra on edge and called the non-emergency police to log it and slept with a knife. Let's not meet. Any of you. This one is from a couple years ago, and it's a short one. It was almost Christmas, and I was doing last-minute shopping at the Tuesday morning by my house. I should also note that it was late in the evening. The sun was setting. As I was walking back to my car, this older man was standing next to his van, which was parked directly next to my car. He looked like Santa without all the beard. He began approaching me and said,
Hey there. Beautiful day we're having today. Want to see the puppy in my van?
I immediately avoided him and walked straight to my car, and having heard no puppy barking or anything of the sort, just made it all the more alarming. I could hear him saying,
Oh, so you're not gonna want to say anything.
As I was shutting the door. I should have locked the door as soon as I got in, because within a few seconds, I saw him walking around the back of my car in my rearview mirror and to my driver's side of my car. It freaked me out so bad, I fired up my car and sped off. I was shaking by the time I got home. Creepy old man luring me into his van. Let's not meet. I stay in a remote area. I guess some would say that I live in the country. I have two neighbors that stay right next to us, and there's a house across the street. We just moved in, and we're still doing renovations, so we are holding out on putting up blinds or curtains until we paint. At night, sometimes I'll wake up and walk into the kitchen and hear little knocking noises. I tried to play it off as me just hearing things, but it seemed it may be something more. Tonight, my boyfriend and I were having our usual Friday movie night, with pizza and a few beers, junk food and movies for the kids. We had all the windows open, seeing how it's getting warmer already in North Carolina. After a few beers and pizza, my boyfriend announces that he's sleepy and wants to go take a shower and go to sleep. As he goes to the shower, I continue to sit at the table next to the open window and browse on my phone. I decide that I want one more beer before going to sleep. So I set my phone down, and as I'm getting up, I hear a noise outside the window. So I turn and look, and someone is crouched down and runs off. I stood at the window petrified for a moment before going to get my boyfriend. He goes outside looking for whoever it was and shot off a warning shot to let them know he's armed. He came back in without finding anyone, and feeling just as paranoid as I was. So, creeper outside the window, let's not meet. Hello all. After hearing a couple of these stories, I thought I would share my own. I've only ever told my best friend about it, and it's all an inside joke now, but I figured maybe someone would get a laugh. Who doesn't need a good giggle now and then? To preface, it was January 2019, and unfortunately, I had landed myself in a psychiatric unit once again. I don't want to say my life story, as I'm not completely comfortable, and I don't think anyone cares, lol. But the gist of it is, I have reoccurring psychiatric episodes that consisted on prologued out-of-body experiences that would leave me mute for 2 to 3 weeks, mostly due to repressing trauma. Thankfully, I am healing day by day, so I don't think I will be visiting again. It was the beginning of my second week there, and I was finally beginning to feel grounded. I began interacting with the people in my unit, and most of them were very nice people. A lot of them helped me out since it was hard communicating, with not being able to talk and all. I was the youngest in all 20, and most of the people in the unit were between 30 and 60 years old, so I think they felt obligated to watch out for me since the staff wasn't very understanding. In fact, a group of ladies decorated a journal just so I would write and communicate with everyone during conversations. Definitely one of the sweetest things that someone had ever done for me. I remember a young man being admitted into our unit, and I remember being a little excited that maybe I could finally talk to someone around my own age. Well, right. I'm pretty shy, so I didn't go out of my way to talk to him. He definitely did once he noticed me. I was sitting in the public area, kind of like having a living room, with one of those older guys. His name was John, and we were watching CSI. He was a sweet older guy. Always tried to make me laugh, as he could tell I was very, very anxious most of the time. Werewolf Boy walks over and sits next to John and begins ranting about how he doesn't want to be there. I try to mind my own business and continue watching the TV. I hear the conversation stop and I feel eyes on me. I turned my head slightly and I see Werewolf Boy staring right at me, jaw slightly agape. I know I'm no looker. I thought maybe he was just surprised to see another young person. I look away again. Have you ever seen a 4-year-old try to whisper? That's how Werewolf Boy did. All I hear is, "Oh my gosh, do you see her? She's like an angel." John nervously laughs and shoots a glance at me. "I want to talk to her." John kind of gestures at me and laughs again, saying, "I think she could hear you." I kind of smile awkwardly and wave. Werewolf Boy asks for my name, and I point to my throat and shake my head. John's nice enough to let him know what was going on. At that moment, a nurse asks for John, leaving Werewolf Boy and I alone. Immediately, he takes John's seat and leans in very close to me. He asks me why I'm in here, and I just give him the short answer. I need help, and I know I could get it here. He nods his head and then immediately goes into a rant again. He tells me his parents threw him in here because he revealed his plans of running off into the woods to find his pack. Apparently, he believes he could turn into a werewolf after casting a certain spell on himself, and he planned to do so and live the rest of his life as a werewolf and possibly go back and kill his parents. I just smile and listen. I understand that he was delusional, but I figured maybe he just wanted somebody to talk to. And I was definitely the perfect listener since I couldn't say anything. After about 45 minutes of trying to give him the hint that I was uncomfortable by staring at the TV, he then proceeds to place his sweaty hand on my arm, pulling me closer to him to ask me if I would consider running away with him. I could figure out how to cast a spell on you too. We could live as werewolves together and find our pack. I know we've only been talking for a short bit, but I think that I'm in love with you. I pull away and shake my head. I open my journal and quickly write, "I'm sorry. I'm feeling a little tired. I'm gonna go to my room." I let him read it, and before he could protest, I began to walk away. I hear him saying, "Remember my offer!" And I turn around and wave goodbye at him before beginning to head towards my room again. Then he howls. I lose it and I start booking it to my room. The rest of the week he followed me around, tries to rub up against me whenever we were in line for food or would try to sit next to me during group. I privately pulled aside one of the nurses to let her know that he was making me feel uncomfortable and would like to be moved to a different group for therapy. They finally did after asking multiple times. The last day that he was in our unit, I remember sitting in the public area once again writing in my journal. I hear someone plop down next to me. I didn't even have to turn my head because he had a very distinct smell. His roommate told me that he had never seen him shower. I continue writing, but I see his greasy hair getting closer to my face while he tried to read what I was writing in my journal. "You writing about me?" Before he could say anything else, I moved to the other side of the room and continue writing. At this point, an older man named Mark was sitting across the public area, crossing his arms and observing. Earlier that week, he had slipped me a note saying that if I ever get uncomfortable around this werewolf boy, to just tell him and he would tell him to back off. Mark was a big, meaty guy with anger issues, but he had 3 young adult daughters of his own, so he definitely had a soft spot for me. A couple of minutes pass and Werewolf Boy sits next to me again. "Am I bothering you?" I didn't answer. Duh. And he pokes me. I look up and I glare at him. I see Mark beginning to stand up and I look up and shake my head. I didn't want any trouble, so I just get up and move again. Immediately, Werewolf Boy follows me, creepily whispering a mile a minute. "Why aren't you looking at me? Did I do something wrong? Are you still going to run away with me?" I sit down and he stands right in front of me, waiting for an answer. I see his grimy hand move towards my head and he caresses my hair. I hear the screech of a chair and out of the corner of my eye, I see Mark stomping over. "Get your frickin' hands off of her. Can't you get a frickin' hint?" Werewolf Boy growls and tries to throw a punch. A couple of the male nurses run over and separate the two, and a group of ladies that made my journal for me take me by the hand and pull me away. It takes 3 male nurses to escort Werewolf Boy away as he yells, "I promise I will never forget you! Promise me, we're gonna run away together!" They ended up moving him to one of the more high security units. He would bare his teeth if we ever happened to pass by his group in the hall. Werewolf Boy, let's not meet again. I honestly forgot about this even happening. It wasn't until my cousin brought it up to me one night when we were actually talking about Reddit and these creepy, crazy things that I had experienced growing up. She even jokingly said that I should post a few of these here, and well, I guess that's why I'm doing it. I am 23 now, and this must have happened when I was about 10 or 12 years old. My cousin came to visit me during the summer. I live in a small town at the time. There probably wasn't even 2,000 people living there. I may not know everyone, but I do know quite a few people in my subdivision, enough to know that most of them are elderly or parents with kids, so this made what had happened so strange. I was just looking for my cat. She's always gone out, which has never been a problem other than that one time where she ran away for a whole week, and ever since then, she's had a curfew. 9 p.m. just before dusk, in my backyard there is a football field and then a bush. Just more of a reason to have her inside at night. It was getting late, and she still hadn't come in. Of course, at the time, me not really paying attention because I was visiting with my cousin. Before I knew it, it was passing midnight and we were heading to bed. I noticed I hadn't seen my cat and started to freak out. I had looked everywhere in the house and shaken her treats, and nothing. I decided to try looking around the house outside, and still, I couldn't find her. I went inside to tell my cousin I was going to walk up the street and see if maybe she was in someone else's yard. I live on one of the end streets of the subdivision, so there's a curve at the end of my street, and as I made my way up the street, I was calling out my cat's name and checking yards as I went along. It was past midnight now, and I didn't expect anyone to be out, but there was this man that was just standing at the end of Lewis Street, which is only the second street after mine. He was just standing there, back facing me on the other side of where the streetlight was, so I couldn't really see much of him. I didn't think too much of it because I was preoccupied looking for my cat, but then I noticed he turned to face right, like completely turning his body to the right and then straight ahead and then back to the left. As I was seeing this, I was kinda confused, thinking what was this man doing? Is he looking for something? And then he turned and faced my direction, and he started walking, which again wasn't really startling me until I realized that he noticed me and started running. This full-grown man started full-out running towards me. I was so scared. I ran as fast as I could, and I heard his footsteps getting louder and closer. I was only 4 houses away from my own house, so it didn't take me long to get there. As soon as I got in, I slammed my door and locked it. And just as I did, staring out the window, heart racing, I didn't see anyone out there. Relieved, I didn't, but sort of curious and confused, wondering where this man could have gone. I went to the living room to look out the big window that oversees the whole street basically, and nothing. No one. The crazy thing is, my cat was inside when I came in. I have no idea how, who, or where this man came from or went, but I was just looking for my cat. It was terrifying, and on that note, let's not meet again. Hearing some of these stories on here reminded me of something that happened during my holiday this past Christmas. I went on a family holiday with my dad, mom, and brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip, just wanted to spend time with my family, so I left all the bookings with my dad, and I never will again. He has his own Airbnb he manages, so I thought he would be able to find decent places on his own. When we walked up to the Airbnb my dad booked, the first thought I had was, if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mom wasn't impressed at all and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything. Maybe the inside is nicer. It was a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, the roof was rusty, and there were plants overgrown on the side of the building. Imagine, it's grown into an actual foundation in wooden planks. There were 3 entrances. The first one I worked out was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, not as bad as our entrance. A little tidier. It went downstairs, so we figured out after a while the host most likely lived below us. The second looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was to even push on it slightly and was obviously unused. The third was ours. Aside from the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal. From the looks of it, we figured out later that it looks like the host had divided the house up somehow. She lives below, we live upstairs, and there was one left of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. Hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for half of the house, and it only went up to the main entrance I spoke of, which is in the middle of the house. We checked in. Just grabbed the keys. The host had never contacted us at this point. All was well on the inside. It looked a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things, though. I only mentioned this to my dad. There was a bunch of antique instruments displayed at the entrance, and right on top of one of the pianos were 3 things that looked like urins. Now to explain, I am of Chinese descent. These urins freak the hell out of me, guys. Some people think they're just for display, but we use them to store dead people's ashes. So I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad, and he didn't like it either, but he went and tapped the urine. What the hell? To see if there was something in it. He couldn't tell, though. But he mentioned that the one he tapped was definitely one we used for ashes. It had scripts on it for like a safe passage to the heavens, from what I could make out. After I stopped freaking out, I went and picked first dibs on the biggest room per my usual, but then noticed there were heaps of mirrors around the room. Again, another thing. Not sure if it's a Chinese thing, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we are in bed if we could help it. So, I went to move one of them, which was smack bag right in front of the bed. It was leaning against a door, and when I took the mirror away, the door actually opened ajar a bit. That freaked me out. I got my dad, and we decided it's better I slept with my mom in another room, and he would take this room with my brother. There was another room, but it's getting long, so I will explain in comments if anyone is interested later. Again, my dad being dad, he opened the door a little and shouted, "Hello?" Before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside, but couldn't make out much, only that it was dusty and seemed to be part of the other half of the house. My dad soon put a chair up and his suitcase on top of it in front of the door to keep it shut. Fast forward to that night, everyone was sleepy and went ahead to bed. I stayed up a little because I had some emails from work to catch up on and went to work in the living room area. At one point in the night, it was around 11:30 p.m., I remember there was a few thumps on the roof. Sounded like someone's footsteps. Then followed by the loudest and most ferocious noise. It sounded like a train that was on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel that lasted for at least 30 seconds. I literally froze at that point. Didn't know what to do. I thought my dad would come check up on me, but he never did. I didn't say anything the next morning because I thought I may have just imagined it out of tiredness. The following night, the same thing happened, except I was in bed this time. I had just gotten into bed, so I wasn't asleep yet. It was around the same time that the same exact noises started up again. My mom woke up but was frozen like me. Dad came to check on us, and we were all just frozen there listening to this noise, wondering what the hell it was. After it stopped, we were freaked out but managed to shrug it off and just went to sleep. Before I fell asleep, I remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning, we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. This is when I told them about the night before. We were extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily it was time to check out that day. We just got the hell out of there. We never found out what it was. The creepiest thing was, after we packed up and were well away from the place, Dad was driving, but he still looked really disturbed, so I asked him if he was okay. He said, "I am now, but I did not have a good sleep last night." I pressed on and asked him, "Was it the noise?" He said nope. That didn't bother him much compared to another thing he experienced. What bothered him most was when we left for our tour on the second day. He still had his suitcase on top of the chair blocking the door in his room. He just showered, so he also left the towel on the chair to hang. He said when he came back, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. The chair had moved slightly and the towel was on the floor, as if someone tried to push it out from the other side, but unsuccessfully after they noticed there was a lot of stuff on the other end. I forced him to ask the host about the noise and the door. She replied that the door was the door to her art room, and the noise had just been a possum on the roof. I don't believe her. The noise was not something of an animal or even a human could make. Airbnb host, I hope we do not meet, like, ever. This happened a few years ago, and I don't live in this town anymore. I was attending college at UNCO in Greeley, Colorado. I lived a few blocks from campus, which was oddly where the most crime took place and the sketchiest people were. Anyways, I was working at a small coffee drive-thru and I was the opener. This meant I had to be at work at around 4:30 a.m., leaving my house around 4:10. One dark morning, as I was leaving for work, I encountered a man who was slumped over by my porch. I almost stepped on him, and once he noticed me, he got up and started screaming and swinging his arms. He was absolutely out of his mind, telling me things like, "Run for your life," and "They're coming!" His words were slurry and slow, but it still scared the shit out of me, and I ran back inside and locked the door. I frantically woke up my roommate and her boyfriend, and the boyfriend went outside to assess the situation. He noticed the man's legs were cut up and there had been blood on our porch. The man started hysterically wailing and asking where his buddy was. My roommate's boyfriend told him that he needed to leave. He stumbled away, still shouting nonsense. The boyfriend came back inside, but we didn't have a way to see the porch from inside, but I needed to get to work. After a few minutes, I booked it to my car. The man hobbled around the corner, stumbling after me, shouting at me to help him. I got in my car and fled the scene as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I saw him lurking into an alley. I know he was probably under the influence of something, but also thought he could be having PTSD flashbacks. In the end, we felt kinda bad for the dude. Either way, still a frightening way to start my morning. So, hysterical stoop dweller, let's not meet. I just got off work. Today, I worked 7 a.m. through 1 p.m. Around 10:45, a man walks in. I've had previous odd encounters with this man, such as seeing him walk behind me around my neighborhood and again hanging out near my street. I had brushed those off since I live right next to where I work and figured he'd live there also, but I always kept an eye on him. Anyways, The man comes in and orders his usual pastry. I work in a bakery, and tells me, "I'm going to stay inside and eat my pastry." For anyone who doesn't know, my county is currently under lockdown because of the coronavirus, and all dining indoors is strictly prohibited. Not to mention, my bakery is tiny, and there's never been any tables to sit inside. Only a coffee bar that has never had space to sit. I tell him, "We're on lockdown, you can't really eat inside." His response chills me. "Are you alone here?" "Yes," I responded stupidly, but quickly tried to catch myself. "But my coworker will be here soon." A complete lie. It's only about 11 a.m. and my coworker isn't scheduled till 1 p.m. when I'm off. "Then no one will see me in here." He responds and goes to eating his pastry at the coffee counter. I roll my eyes and go back to work, not getting paid enough to care as he quickly eats his pastry and leaves. 10 minutes pass, then 15. This guy is still in my bakery. I look over and he finishes his pastry and had moved closer to the open space in the counter meant for employees to walk back and forth between the front of the store and to the employees only side. Now I'm starting to get uncomfortable. I quickly text my coworker, a 30-year-old man who owns a lot of guns and treats me like his little sister, 911. I look over again, and now the man is even closer and is now reading a book. He's putting the book in front of his face and peeking at me from above it, watching me. Multiple customers come in during his stay. Every time I turn my back to him, he gets closer and closer and closer to me. Until eventually, he is halfway in our employee-only area. I begin frantically texting my coworker. He tells me he's 4 minutes away. I finally make the decision to text my boyfriend. I had avoided doing so to keep from scaring him, but now I was terrified. I sat in the back of the employee area watching this guy. I held a knife just in case he decided to come any closer. Just as he takes a step closer, my coworker busts through the door. A confrontation ensues, and the man leaves the shop, but continues to sit in his parked car right out front and stares at me. I tell my coworker about the previous experiences I've had with him, and he's had enough. He marches outside to the guy's car and tells him next time he comes around, it will be his last. My boyfriend pulls up at this point and joins in with the warnings. "So Matthew, aka my stalker, let's not meet again." This happened to me years ago, when I was maybe 17. I am 23 now. My family was on vacation. We were staying at a resort in South Carolina on the beach. The resort had 2 buildings, one directly by the beach, and one was across the street. We were staying in the building across the street. My cousin, my sister, and myself decided to go and sit at the beach one night. It was probably around 9 p.m. There were usually a few people out walking or playing around. On this night, there wasn't anyone out there except for a few couples walking by randomly. We sat down some towels and watched the water from a good distance. We were chatting and telling stories. We noticed a man walking around us, going to the water, back to the walkway leading up to the resorts, back and forth. He got closer and closer to us until he was walking so close he stepped on the edge of our towels. He was a big man with shaggy blonde hair. My sister suggested that we go down to the water. He followed us. At this point, we knew he was following us, so we decided to leave. We started up the wooden walkway back to our building. Like I said, our building was across the street. To get to it, you had to pass through a little alleyway. The alley was well lit and the street was relatively busy, but there was a parking garage adjacent to the alleyway. My head immediately told me not to walk past that parking garage. We were facing the alleyway, about to walk through. This guy is right behind us. I loudly said, "Hey, wait! Let me beat off my sandals." We stopped and took our shoes and beat the sand off of them. The man passed us reluctantly. So close, he was almost touching us. I saw his eyes for the first time. He was definitely on something. His pupils looked fucked. His eyes were wide as saucers. He passed by us slowly and went... Where? Directly into the parking garage. I knew he was waiting for us. I said, "Run!" We ran back over the wooden walkway and onto the beach, through the sand and through the next walkway which led up to another building's pool area. He was behind us again, chasing us, running full force. We got into the pool area and the man stopped. There was a woman cleaning and we told her what happened. She got hotel security and a police officer asked us some questions and walked us back to our building. I was scared by this experience for a while, and I will not go to the beach at night ever again without my very large and tough fiancé by my side ever again. So, creepy beach chaser, let's not meet. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this probably happened when I was 15. Growing up, I visited my father and stepmother every summer for about a month. One evening while I was visiting, my stepmom and I were on a walk around their neighborhood. The walk started out completely normal until it wasn't. As we were walking past these two houses, the backyards were viewable. We spotted something so strange happening between them that we stopped dead in our tracks. For like 20 seconds, we stood in silence trying to decipher what our eyes were seeing. Keep in mind, the sun was setting, so it was kinda dark. First, we see a dog in one of the yards. It was standing right at the fence line and peering into the neighbor's yard. The fences were those metal ones that you could see through. Then, we see the thing the dog was looking at. In the other yard, crouched low to the ground was, at first glance, this unidentifiable mass. Was it another dog? No. A child playing outside? No. It was a completely naked man on all fours, crouched on the ground and crawling.
Hey, doggy.
He slowly crawled towards this dog in the most disturbing, disgusting way I have ever seen a human move. Behind him were his clothes perfectly folded in a pile waiting to be put back on. My stepmom and I couldn't form words as we watched this man approach this confused dog. When he reached the fence line where the dog stood, he then proceeded to shove his face into the fence to what appeared to be him greeting the dog. After my stepmom and I fully realized what we were seeing, we turned around and sped walked home to tell my father, who was a cop. He didn't believe us one bit. My stepmom and I tend to make everything we experience together 20 times more dramatic, but he eventually bought our very real account and called it in. We later found out that this creep is known for breaking into people's yards, stripping naked, and playing with their pets. My stepmom still feels bad about the young me seeing that, but I think it's a funny way to see your first nude man. So, to the naked man crawling outside, let's not meet again.